For this episode, I am joined by John Paul Zaccarini, Professor of Performing Arts at Stockholm University of the Arts in Stockholm, Sweden, a school providing, quote, education and conducts research in the fields of circus, I forgot to look that word up, how to say it. I'll ask you once we start talking film, media, opera, performing arts, and acting. Previously the artistic director of Company FZ and a member of the dance company DV8, John Paul is a trained dancer and actor who has directed and choreographed circus and theater productions in the UK, Denmark, and Sweden, working with circuses and choreographed aerial dances for the Royal Variety Performance, the Nobel Prize Award ceremonies, and Hermès luxury design house. John Paul has published several research papers, which include the 2019's The Melancholy of Lost Movements, 2017's Falling, The Thought of Circus, and 2013's Circle Analysis, Circus Therapy and Psychoanalysis. In John Paul's words, he's homo funky and street spunky, serving up South London shade and immigrant working class realness. I love that. And now, without further ado, John Paul, greetings and welcome. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. We are at the beginning of the week here in Sweden. How's your day been so far?
It's been a great day, in fact. I've been with a PhD student discussing 13th century female mystics, intimacy and violation and the pleasures of violation. And so that was a good start to my day.
Okay. When you mean violation, is that seen the same way as it was back in the 13th century?
I think it means kind of the ability to be open, passive, and available to be entered. And so being violated by the grace of God, I think, in this instance. So we were talking about various forms of like ecstasy and being with people, being with each other, and allowing yourself to be open and receptive to the other. And how violation, I think, in terms of creating art can be intensely pleasurable, but also is a risk.
Okay.
Yeah, it's always very exciting speaking with him around his work, because we talk a lot about what pleasure might mean in a kind of expanded way, not just the everyday pleasures, but much more maybe otherworldly pleasures. So
okay.
It's always an exciting chat.
Mm-hmm. Want to ask more questions about that. It's already intriguing to me. Definitely, I was thinking, doesn't sound very Swedish.
No, and he's Hungarian. So
okay.
What it made me think of when talking to him, because he's also talking about the spiritual act of self-annihilation, in a way, getting yourself out of the way to be open to grace, to be open to ecstasy. And I just said, have you researched bottoms at all? Because it just makes me think of the practice of bottoming. Mm. And then he's studiously scribbling down, my teacher says, research bottoms.
So I'm guessing he's straight.
Well, he's queer, so he was very, no pun intended, open to the conversation. I was talking about self-shattering, removing yourself from the situation, being open. And he said to me, does that mean that as a guide of the experience that I do in my artwork, I have to be the top? I was like, well, not at all. I don't know. Let's think about that next session. How can we all be bottoms in the experience with no one having to take the lead and be the top?
Putting that in the context of sexual positions, gay sexual positions, it sounds like it's an opportunity to be to trust.
Exactly, and I think this is a key theme in his work that I'm helping him with. How do you get us to trust you so that we become open and receptive? And what does that look like? Like, very technically, let's not be kind of fluffy about it. Technically, when we walk into your space, how is it that we trust you so that we become open and passive And his idea of passivity as well is not doing nothing. It's a very responsive doing that is passive. The welcoming in of, in this case, grace and ecstasy.
It sounds like a dance, a partner dance.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of, we had set up this interview at the beginning of whatever week that was, and then just by chance, I ran into you at a performance, a dance performance. Batty Boy, the Jamaican Norwegian
Right.
artist, Harold Bahari. Were you connected to that production?
Not at all, but I'm not going to miss a production called Batty Boy. I, I grew up in South London and around a lot of Jamaicans in that part of London, Elephant and Castle. So I heard that word a lot. Batty Boy.
I wondered if that, with that being the title of the piece, was that a way of reclaiming a negative term? I wasn't sure.
I think it must be. I mean, the performance was so energetic and luxuriant and like non-stop. I mean, that stamina of that guy.
Yeah.
By the end of it, he was like kind of mime humping for about a good sweaty 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was like, please, Lord, let him come. Please, Lord, someone come. I'm exhausted watching this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect, and just in line with this conversation, the conversation that I'm having with you, I feel like that was the second time for me that I really, speaking of being open and receptive, that I was really receptive to, I guess I don't know if this is the right terminology, to more modern or contemporary dance. And I actually really liked the performance, and it just really made me aware that there's so much more out there that I need to discover and to absorb and embrace. But speaking of, how long have you been a professor at the university here in Stockholm?
I was an associate professor in circus for about 4 years. And then I became full professor. I've now been a full professor for 2.5 years now. And now I'm a professor at the research center. So I work across all the art forms that we work with here, not specifically any one in particular, but I have a profile area which I kind of tend and take care of, which is the area of bodily and vocal practices. So being a vocal and physical performer myself, I look after that area and I kind of, yeah, that's my realm of expertise in terms of research. That's kind of how I do my research through my body and and with my voice. And in quite intimate ways sometimes, being a brown person in very white Sweden, I've realized that actually my skin is like an interface of the research. Like my skin is what creates the data, and it's my skin that receives the data from a very white environment. In my research and my teaching, in performance, I always bring it to the body and the relationships that that body creates when walking into a room, and how, in a sense, you can be in control of the script that that body performs, as opposed to always walking into a room or a space and having like a preconceived script written for you, depending on your gender presentation, the color of your skin, the way you speak. I'm very much interested in that, particularly now here in Sweden, which is, especially in the fields that I work in, it's majority white. The artistic fields, the educational sphere, the university. Yeah, so my body and my skin is what collects data and what actually gives data back to the environment.
When I saw the piece, just referencing Batty Boy quickly, I came with a friend of mine, Teresa, and then seeing a couple people that we both know there, Anna and Andrea. And afterwards, I was telling my friend that I was really, really glad I saw that particular piece with people of color. And not that we were the majority, but just having that energy around me, I think it helped me to focus more. And I don't really have words for that, but just kind of tying into what you shared when you talk about the body, are you referencing like how others are interpreting who you are, or what you do?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example. I mean, I really hear you. If I had been the only brown body in the space, apart from the performer, and that's often the case, I would have been too concerned with how the others were viewing that brown body on stage and how they might have been conspicuously not looking at me to refer back to their experience. Am I looking at this right? How is he experiencing this? Because I've had that before. I've had that before in the Arthur Jaffe experience at the Moderna Museum, the visual artist Arthur Jaffe, where I was walking around this exhibition, which was very black, only black images, and being the only brown person there, and the incredible anxiety I was feeling of also being a piece of art in the space, like being an object to be viewed and interpreted and referred back to, or to mirror their experience. Or so I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's the kind of I'm aiming to create more spaces in Stockholm or more moments in Stockholm where people of color can appreciate each other and their ideas and work together without that added pressure of being a reference point for blackness, or a representation, or no, sorry, a representative of blackness for those who are curious.
You put the words to what I was feeling, and I hadn't even thought of that I wasn't focused on the other audience members. There was a couple times where I glanced just by chance, but then to your point, I just looked away because it was about me absorbing the performance. I hadn't thought of it that way.
It's interesting because you get a chance to actually focus in on yourself and not maybe other people's gaze upon you or on something else. I was looking at other people because we were sat kind of opposite each other in various constellations as the performance moved around. And I was very interested about where people's eyes were. There was a lot of anus in that show. There was like up front, in your face, spread cheeks. There was a lot of there was a lot of rosebud happening in that show. And
Yeah.
I was interested in where people were looking, and if they were looking away or looking to something else on his body, because it was right there in front of you. And so I was amusing myself looking at other people, not looking.
Yeah. You know, I discovered you, or you came onto my radar through your YouTube channel, Instagram, Future Black Space, and the name alone just really intrigued me. And then I did a little bit more research on it, but just to hear from you, what is Future Black Space?
It's a real and both imaginary space for people of color to be with each other and do their work without the pressure of what I've called the white gaze. Obviously, it's a separatist moment that we have with each other as a form of recuperation, breathing space, where we don't have to over explain or just be in a constant introduction mode to our work. Because often what happens is when we stand up in front of a white cohort or group or meeting, let's say everyone gets an hour to do their stuff in front of other people, I find that we spend the first 55 minutes just calming everyone the hell down before we actually get to the point. So we have to do a lot of teaching around the notions of brownness or blackness and what we mean and who we are and what we're not doing. We have to give a little history lesson, and then we have to calm everyone down because we're talking about race. And even if we're not talking about race, when we stand up in the room, suddenly race becomes super evident because we're the only brown person in the room. So all the white folk get super anxious, and especially in Sweden, where it's such a stilted, stuttering conversation. It's not like the US, where there's some kind of fluency and people are used to talking about this. People are used to making fun of it or being furious about it. Or, I mean, people, that is on the table. Same as in the UK from where I was brought up. Mm-hmm. So we do all that calming down. And then at the last 5 minutes, we finally get to say what it is we have to say. And everyone else has had a whole hour to move forward in their work. And so if we're constantly over-explaining so that we don't cause or provoke those outbursts of white fragility, dealing with all of that, it's very hard for us to move forward. And I think it's very pertinent what you said about your kind of energy being able to focus in and down upon yourself and your relationship to the performance that you were experiencing. Mm-hmm. Future Black Space creates spaces where we can do just that, focus in on ourselves. And we don't have to share so much about our experiences, because just having a screen full of brown faces immediately allows us to take a breath. And then we realize how much we're holding our breath in those other spaces, how we're censoring our speech for fear of causing this upset. And censoring our speech means that we're not being 100%. We're not being 100% full of ourselves and our movement. And so during the process of having a lot of these sessions and workshops with people of color, and mostly from the Black diaspora, but it's open to anyone who feels othered or blackened by this world, what we understand is this thing called the white gaze isn't about white people. So self-censorship. This is the space to explore what your blackness might mean to you when you don't have to refer it back in a negative way to something that is white. It's only when I walk out the house that suddenly I remember, oh, okay, no, I'm different. You suddenly made me something else. You put me in a script, and suddenly I'm trapped in your white fantasy of me.
Connected to that, I saw, the first video that I saw from your YouTube channel was the one Afro Swede, and I felt it. And the words that came to my mind were beautiful and haunting and sumptuous. But I don't know why. It's just those words came to me. Yeah.
That was interesting because the hair pieces are huge. I mean, they're huge afros, they're huge curls. It's one of a series called Black Occupations. And right, we're going to occupy the space. An occupation is also a military intervention. So it was meant to happen in the heart of the city. I remember walking, I'll get back to it, but on the side, I remember one morning my afro just popped up. So it does that when I grow it out, and then suddenly one morning it will just pop out, and there it is, and I'm bouncing. It's bouncy. I don't walk, I strut. My hips move differently. I'm so happy when my afro pops out. And I was walking down the road, suddenly realizing that the afro was bouncing, and I had some groove in my step. A little bit. I'm half Italian, so it was a little bit John Travolta, like a brown John Travolta with my afro. And I saw this coming. There was a guy leant up against the bus stop, and he saw me coming, and I heard him gather the phlegm in his throat to spit at me. I dodged it, and I said, "Niss me, bitch." And I walked on, and I was thinking to myself, that's really interesting. It's almost like my joy is unbearable to you. It's like you can be here, but keep quiet, keep minimal. For God's sake, don't enjoy yourself. So I was really aware of this moment that, wow, my joy is threatening. So therefore, these wigs were a symptom of that. I thought, we'll do this. But then, because it was like coming up to election time, as I was devising the idea in my head, and election time things are bad on the street. Things get worse. People are emboldened. So they will say more racist stuff. And I thought, I can't have my dancers be that black in the center of town. So we put them in the countryside. There they could occupy space.
So did academia bring you to Sweden?
I came to Sweden to have a child with my best Swedish friend. Yeah, so we are co-parents. And then I thought I'd better get a job and stop being a freelance experimental artist. And so I got a job at the university and finished my PhD here, and then quite quickly got a super good job here.
Yeah, in the intro, I mentioned your research project, circle analysis, circus therapy, and psychoanalysis. Can you share what is circus analysis?
Yeah, psychoanalysis. You always have to make up a new word when you do a PhD because you're meant to be inventing something. So it's a combination of circus and psychoanalysis. I observed that circus artists didn't really have a voice in their training. It was quite a classical procedure of like, do what you're told, copy these things, do these things every day, and you will be perfect. And then circus will love you and you will be a circus artist. Having read a lot about psychoanalysis, I knew that kind of demand is the best way to squash desire. And I wondered if it would be possible to allow the circus artist to express their desire against those demands. So I studied psychoanalysis. I went into psychoanalysis for 3 years. And I would put circus artists on the couch and allow them to have this moment of really speaking about themselves, to kind of discover what was driving their artistic creations. And then after 30 minutes of talking about circus, they start telling me about their mother. It was just like, that just happened with every single one of them. They start talking about their mom and their dad and their relationship with their teacher. But out of all these people that they spoke about, they never once spoke about the audience. Because without the audience, what is circus? It's going to the gym, basically. That's the relationship you're trying to establish in the world, you and your public. So I find it interesting that they spoke about everyone else except the audience. And so I came to the conclusion that there must be some kind of relationship they are repeating in their circus act to the audience that is in need of some kind of healing or moving on from. If you did it, you'd realize how violent it was to the body. It's super dangerous, it's risky. So why put yourself through that every night for the applause? So yeah, it ended up being about relational dynamics for me in the research.
I just thought, well, is there like a profile of a person who usually goes into the circus?
Masochists, obsessive compulsives, hysterics, narcissists, I don't know. I do know that my psychoanalyst, he said to me, what exactly do you do in your circus act, John Paul? And I knew that if I said, I do a double twist and a somersault, that doesn't really mean anything to someone, a layperson. So I said, well, I seduce you. I shock you, I stun you, I keep you glued to your seat, I keep your eyes glued on me, I make you fall in love with me briefly, and I'm unattainable, which makes you love me more. And she said, John Paul, what kind of person does that? And I was like, okay, yeah, I understand. So that kind of person, in my case, is the sort of person that goes into the circus. I've often said that if I would do in social life what I did in the circus, I'd be locked up.
Well, what sparked your interest? I know you are a trained actor and dancer, but did you train all at the same time, like doing circus or becoming a circus performer?
No, I think I did one at a time. I wanted to be an actor, so I trained as an actor. But I was so in love with dancing that I then started at the same time training as a dancer. and then finally ended up in like this thing called physical theatre, which is where you do both. You know, much as I loved like Shakespeare and the American playwrights, it was somehow very hard for me to do that. So in physical theatre, we create the script as an ensemble. And then I realized, no, there's still something missing in this. And when I arrived at the circus when I was around 22, 23, I thought, no, this is it. This is the way I want to express myself to the world. When I've done my own work on it, there is something to do there. If you can't allow me a place in your world for all of this intersectional, queer, working class, brown mess, I will create that place. And actually, the nearest place, unfortunately, is like 20 meters up in the air away from you and doing these kind of ridiculous, contortionist, dangerous things. It seemed like that was where I really found my expression. And also like a homeopathic dose of trauma from school, being the only brown, queer, working class kid there at school, in a very kind of posh school.
How soon after you studied did you start to create your own work?
Actually, I left drama school after a year to create my own work. So instead of fulfilling the 3-year program, I was too impatient. And I knew the work I wanted to do was so different to what I was learning. It was already super queer, the work I wanted to create. It was political, and no one else in my peer group or teachers were very interested in politics. They were more interested in getting a better voice, being a better actor, and I was only interested in the content. So I left immediately and started creating kind of my own pieces.
Yeah. Kind of getting back to intersectionality, I watched your 2020 piece, the Mixed Race Mixtape. I really liked it. You know, I was immediately pulled in with the pejoratives that you use, faggot, peasant, nigger lips. It feels weird to say all that. But how strong they can be, going back to what you said earlier, us taking on, or me taking on the white gaze. But can you talk about this body of work?
The reason I made that piece was that I was in the circus department at the time, and it was very white, it was very straight, and it was kind of overseen by this like invisible male normativity, like a masculine normativity. It wasn't written down anywhere, but the rules were male. It's meant to be a meritocracy, but the girls are treated the same as the boys, but they have different bodies and different skills. So the demands placed on the women, sorry, not girls, the demands placed on the women are in a way kind of unfair. So there's this masculinist vibe happening, which sometimes emerges in homophobia. I had enough of this. Every day I had to do a queer thing, a feminist thing, and a brown thing, or a black thing. So in the cafe, in the classroom, just to remind you lot that there are other ways of moving and being in the world that aren't straight, white, cis, and male. My queerness allowed me to have a sense of humor about it, which made sure there was no arguments. They just accepted that I was a little camp and a little bitchy and a little shady. And it's very simple things like walking into a class and saying, "Morning, white boys." They would laugh, but then they would realize, oh, I actually am white. Actually, it's a thing. I can also be racialized as white. And so then I wrote the show like a performance seminar. But instead of kind of writing academic essays around intersectionality, I thought I would use my own experience and use the forms of spoken word and hip hop and song to sweeten the pill, soften the blow. And funny thing about this whole show is I wrote it in about 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And that's a lot of material to write in 3 weeks. It's a full-length spoken word show, but it took me 2 years to present it publicly. And then I went away and studied up, did my black study, did my queer study, went back to kind of Marxism and the theories of working class, whether that be white working class or not, or immigrant working class, to really kind of back myself up. So that if you come for me, I'm quite direct in the show, with shade and with humor. It's, I'm reading the fuck out of the white people in the audience. But if I'm going to do that, I need backup. So if you come for me, I will have the reference, I will have the theory, I will have the examples, I will have everything. So it took me 2 years to actually present the show because of fear of creating outbursts of this fragility in the people that received it.
What was the response from the public?
The response is always super. It's just super. And I think it's because there's a mixture of super directness, like, I can't believe he's saying that. How is he getting away with that? And then the next minute being super vulnerable. So people have often described my style as like tickling you to make you giggle and then sliding a knife between your ribs. And I think that the people in the audience who are queer and of color just going, you say it, you tell them. Because it's like, for a change, there's someone on stage speaking for us.
Yeah.
He made this for us. There we go. It's not just about having a black superhero. It's about having a black story in a black superhero movie.
Yeah. Yeah, much more visceral. I don't know if that's the right word. Have you always been somebody who's committed to, the only phrase I could think of is telling it like it is?
Yes, I have been. There was a 10-year space of time when I focused in on the more grown-up business of what it actually takes to create a touring company. So I worked with someone else for 10 years. It wasn't the work that really feeds my soul. When I decided to stop doing that and go into academia, academia was the place where I could continue to tell it as it was. I found where I need to be in order to continue to push the conversation.
I was going to just reference quickly from the mixtape performance quotes that I wrote down, where his clothes started saying it, his room started smelling it. From my own personal experience, it just, like, when I look back on those moments, those little blips where somebody was telling me you're different. So it's like, without knowing really who I was as far as being queer, somebody was letting me know you're different.
Yeah.
It's important, I know, to focus on the youth and the younger generation. But for those of us who are already here, it's like, I still need healing. I still need help.
And I've come across these moments where I'm like, oh my God, I'm still learning. Oh my God, how much more healing is there to be done? I mean, the good part of that is that it keeps me young. Right? I'm not settled in anything. And I think our generation, we put up with so much. And you get to understand how much you bottled up or shut away because you just had to get on with stuff. We kept ourselves under wraps, our true selves, for such a long time. That can't be good. This podcast is, I hope, about people that are thriving in their work with the world.
Mm-hmm.
That particular song, the Inner City Blues, it came about because I wondered what would have happened if that sissy boy that I was had been allowed to continue that journey and not put the sissy in a box and bury it. I can't even speculate upon what kind of person and how free I would be if that sissy boy had been allowed to develop his expression without all that oppressive violence.
But you put in there too, you said that film is flawed, plus reverse, stop and start your story. That really is relatable to where I'm at in my life the last few years. It's like, yes, I have been traveling down this road. I never got off the exits, but you know what? All of a sudden I'm seeing that green sign says I can go that way. So that means I can start my story over again, which doesn't mean that I'm erasing what's already happened, but I can start a new chapter. I don't know.
Actually, it has a lot to do with forgiveness. It
Yeah.
has a lot to do with forgiving myself. then a different story emerges through all that time. Forgiveness and self-compassion, have compassion for, what's the way of saying this nicely? Compassion for white fragility, let's say. And that seems like the best way of working with it. Let's talk about stuff we can do. Get your feelings out of it.
When did you become aware of your gifts as a performer?
There's a factual answer and a true, then there's a true answer. I think they're two different things. The factual answer was a school play. And when my mum came to see it, "You're an actor, aren't you? I didn't expect." No, so that was around, I think, about 11 or something like that. But I think the truer response is, and again, this is about both intersectionality, but also having to be a chameleon, being put into a very posh private school where being gay, you would be expelled. So having to perform being straight, having to perform class. I mean, you don't do this consciously as a kid. You just try and fit in so you don't get beat up. And as I was saying before, this performance of masculinity, all of that is a performance. And then, later on, being queer in the 90s in London, this is the time of HIV and AIDS. This is Margaret Thatcher. Going into a gay club and being one thing, and then coming out of that gay club the second you open the door and being another thing, that's all performance. Yeah, that's the true answer. The other one's a fact. I can read a situation and slip into that script and perform that script. Passing is a performance. And it depends on my hair, depends on my clothes, how I might read, being very light-skinned. I can notice that suddenly I'm passing for not white, but Mediterranean, for example. And I realize I'm a little bit of a double agent. Those have been very interesting moments in Sweden for me when that has occurred. They haven't realized I'm biracial.
So you do notice a stark difference, not so much culturally, because that's somewhat easy to recognize, but the undercurrents of racism, the difference between here and the UK.
Yeah. I mean, in the Mixed Race mixtape, I don't know what the line is, but I call it the everyday mosquito stings of you don't quite belong. Not quite sticks and stones, more like splinters, cold and constant, like a Swedish winter. And that metaphor of the mosquito stings is, I think, something quite used when people are describing microaggression, because it's not something you notice when you get stung, but you get home and you itch. Like, what is it that's bugging me? And we go home and for me, the metaphor is more like asbestos. Like it's in the walls and it's toxic, but no one will remove it because it's not profitable to remove that asbestos and rebuild. But also then we're breathing that shit in every day and we wonder why we go home and cough blood. Slightly more extreme, but it's a way of trying to understand how pervasive and like in the air like particles it is. It's invisible, but it's again everywhere. You're battling your own double consciousness. Am I paranoid? And I find it interesting because when you feel the thing, it's very hard to process that quickly all the data that you need to process for you to be able to respond and say, no, excuse me, I think what you can't say that. What you've just said demeans me or objectified me or something or other, because you've got adrenaline. You go into fight and flight, and then suddenly your brain is just full of hormones. Comes with being black in an anti-black world.
Or when they give you who they are, and I don't think they realize it sometimes. I had that this past weekend. A friend was there, and then an acquaintance of his, and she was very inquisitive, me as a Black American while I was here in Sweden. And then it got on the subject of career, and I said I moved to LA from Arizona to be an actor, And I was frustrating at the time because of my own self-esteem. And I was always being sent out for the nice guy or whatever. And I wanted to be edgy. But edgy to me meant something more exciting. And she goes, "Oh, I could see you as a drug dealer." I was like,
Oh God.
wow, you don't even realize that.
You don't realize they're doing it. You don't realize they're doing it. And it's even worse when it comes in the form of a compliment, because it's confusing to receive a compliment that has a knife underneath it. Oh, for us to process that, yeah.
So anyway, but just to relate it to what you were sharing, yeah. You're here in Sweden and you're from the UK. Have you lived in other countries besides here in the UK?
No, this is the first time it's the first time I've immigrated.
Okay.
I understand my parents a lot better now, who were both immigrants. I'm like, oh, I get you. Emigrating is a thing. And I'm like one of the most privileged of immigrants, like super educated, straight into a job. There's a whole network here, really good at English, okay with language, and they didn't have any of those. I'm just being a whingy millennial, even though I'm Gen X.
I want to thank you. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and just to ask if you have any final thoughts or insights you'd like to share.
When I work with anti-racism and diversity, with Black groups, when I work with Uplift, I like to use the stages of grief, shock, denial, bargaining, rage, depression, hope. When I'm working with people of color, I'm constantly trying to say, there is uplift. Can we stay in looking up and looking out and looking forward? We have a melancholic history, which, it returns to us as points, and not just our history of 40, 50 years, but 400 years or 600 years worth of it. The weather, the racist weather in the States affects us. We think we're in reconstruction, hope and uplift, and then another death, and we're back in shock, and we're back to crying. But we'll be back in uplift soon. So I think this process of grief is like, for me, it's a question of just getting used to it. Okay, something's going to happen. Some shitty thing will happen at work, like the drug dealer thing. Okay, I'll be thrown back into shock and then bargaining with, and then maybe being codependent with my white colleagues. And then I'll move back, and I know where I'm heading. I want to stay in hope. Yeah, that's what I would like to say. I want to stay in hope, and I'm looking to the future. And not just that, I'm trying to live the future now. I'm trying to imagine my Afrofuturist fantasy like now. Yeah, that will be my last word.
Okay. Thank you for that. And where can we engage with you, follow you online?
FutureBrownSpace on Instagram. And as soon as our website is up, that'll be on our Instagram, FutureBrownSpace.
Okay. I owe you an apology. I think I quoted it incorrectly once, and hopefully just one time. Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.